I can see Scotty Teal has got a lot out of this in quarantine in Hong Kong. Let's throw over to Olivia, who, of course, without whom today would not have happened. Liv, is there anyone you'd like to bring into the room around questions?
Well, most of them actually Jim's answered on the chat, which is great. So if anybody has a question they just want to start off, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Olivia, let me jump in one I didn't cover. Okay, and you can either throw them in chat or in the Q&A or whatever. Oh, hold on, we have a hand raised. Let's go to Mandy and then I'll come back to that question.
Hey everybody, I am joining you from Indianapolis. Sorry, noisy space. I just wanted to say that this strength process, finding to be limitless, has honestly changed my life. And the response that I get often from leaders is, gosh, I wish I'd known this earlier on in my career. And so it's not a question as much as just a comment and a shout out, and just, big love for all of you.
Mandy is our #1 international ambassador. She was at the Shard with the Gallup team last week.
Nice.
She was with Hannah Lomax last week at the Shard.
I'm a little jealous, to be honest. I would have liked to have been at the Shard with you guys. Last week.
But Mandy is great. Our #1 global To Be Limitless ambassador, and also a massive Gallup Strengths Finder ambassador as well.
Mick, I hear that phrase a lot. I wish I had. Well, okay, we can't go back. So let's take that wish and let's double it down on today. Because I don't want you 5 years from now to say, oh man, I wish 5 years ago I would have started, right? Double down today so you don't have to say you wish 5 years from now.
Yeah, fantastic. I see Chris Seymour's got his hand up. So Chris is the former CEO, I think, former CEO of Mott MacDonald in the Middle East region. But when he said he was leaving, they loved him so much they created a role that I'm pretty sure he's still not sure what the role is. I think he's still making it up, but they've created a role for Chris to stay because they just couldn't lose him because he's a superhuman superstar. So, Chris, over to you with your question, mate.
Thanks for introing me. And Jim, I've enjoyed this because I think it's I've found I guess a strengths-based assessment of myself, but also team really useful. But one of the questions I've got is actually when you are building that team, how do you? I found some success in finding others that have got different strengths to what I have. But what I'm usually doing is surrounding myself with 6 people who directly create, if you like, that gap that I perceive at the bottom of that table. But I wonder if you should be, when you're building that team, should you actually be trying to fill in find people with all of those strengths so you, in a way, have a full hand? Or actually, should you be creating a suite of people that, so for example, if I'm too big picture, should I just be finding 6 or 7 people who are real detail focused? Because I have to say, I have done that and I found some success with it, but it by no means created a full hand of those full strengths. So I'd just be interested in your advice there around team building.
Chris, it's a really great question. It's very complicated. When we think about team formations and you think about if you're hiring for it or if you're working with teams, you might be forming a team where you have oftentimes you don't even have choices. So let's admit that, right? You get a team, that's just what it is. There's nothing you do. If you have a say in it, I think we would say competencies go first. So think about, what does the individual need to be able to do the job? So competencies, can they do that? Can they fill those, just in a management standpoint, do they have the competencies to be a manager? That's a whole different question. Do they have the strengths to do it, right? Can they actually do the job? I think, you can, when you think about filling those gaps, and you can kind of use strengths to figure some of those things out. Clifton Strengths itself doesn't always give you everything you need, though, I think, from a competency standpoint, right? From a skill set standpoint. So competencies first, but then once the team is formed or you're working, then strengths can be a great tool to figure out how to accelerate those relationships in it. I just be a little hesitant to do strengths only in team formation settings. Once teams are established, then of course you're off to the races with strengths. So that is, it's super complex and super complicated and probably needs a lot of thought and a lot of work. You can have a team where everybody's the same and you can be super successful. You can have a team where everybody's different and you can be super successful. I think the difference is, does the team know that or not, right? Does the team know if it's all the same or if it's made up of these different themes? And what does that mean to the team? So great conversations to be had by the team after they get formed. And of course, Clifton Strengths allows you to have those conversations faster. So I don't know, Chris, does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that particularly in terms of a leadership team, my experience is that it's not if you have a bunch of 6 or 7 that have similar strengths, it does create a little bit of imbalance. And you keep agreeing with each other, and that's not good either. And so you need to somehow create that tension, which is, so if you've got those in the team that are always thinking at a strategic level, you do need people saying, actually, but that might work on strategy, but really this is what the picture is really if you take a look at it, because I'm loving detail and that's what it's telling me. And that sort of tension is quite helpful sometimes. And so I found mixing up those strengths is a good thing to do.
Yeah. And remember, in team formations, I mean, we've talked about competencies and strengths, but diversity in thought, diversity in location, like we can't miss DEI for all of those. Like, how, as we come, especially, in the area of thought, like, do we think differently, or did we all grow up in the same culture, the same thought process?
And you're probably not getting that out of the strengths, are you?
No.
That's a different dimension to me.
Yeah. To kind of think through. So a very multi-dimensional approach. I'm hesitant. Sometimes we hear of organizations that are trying to use Clifton Strengths to hire, and it's really, Clifton Strengths really comes in at the end of that process, not the beginning. There's other things I think that are more important in the hiring or the team formation.
That is helpful. That is helpful. Thank you.
And one of the things we talk about, Chris, in our process as well is, and I was just with Raf, and Raf's on the call too, he's the managing director of Kraft Heinz in Southeast Asia. And we talk about right fit people, then identify the strengths, then put great leaders to work. Because I think it's a multi-dimensional piece as well. Right fit. Get a group that you think are right fit people, then identify collective and individual strengths, then put great leaders to work. And as Jim talked about, there's a complexity to it, but the strengths definitely, when you think you've got right fit teams, Jim, isn't it? When you can identify the individual and the collective strengths and really start to leverage that, it really gives you, it's a real turbocharge on the back of that. So we've got Sandy Halpin. Sandy's got a hand up. Sandy's coming to us from Sydney. The last time I saw Sandy, we were going deep and hard at my wife's 50th birthday. Late in the day, we were amongst the last people standing. So on slightly unsteady feet, I might say, Sandy, but with lots of that energy that you bring. So Sandy, what's your question for Jim?
Yeah, thanks Mick, thanks Jim. Great session tonight. Because I use strengths a lot. I do coaching and team coaching as well, and I'm currently working with a group where they're really discovering their individual strengths and having some really interesting conversations. But I have one person who is in that position where he believes that he knows himself so well, yet he appears to not know himself at all. And when you have those one-on-one conversations and you are all about what's right with the person, what makes you great, past success, all that stuff. And then when you talk with the teams around engagement, how things going, what do things look like, and that person comes up regularly as unaware of, he believes he's strategic, but he's actually micromanaging. And it's, it's at the very beginning of the journey. And, what are some tips to try and crack that nut in terms of helping him really reflect? Because I'm very conscious as well, you don't want to do that in an environment where I'm told when he gets some feedback, he sulks and disengages. Like, wow, this is like, you speak to the person, it's one person, and you get an image, and he loves what he's talking about, and he loves his report. And then you hear the reality, and you know that there's something happening there, but I need him still engaged, right?
Yeah. This is a really hard question, because an individual, and it may not be a strengths thing, just to be honest. Let me just start with that. You may get an individual that, because of life's experiences, they've been burned, they've been, whatever's happened to them emotionally, they may need counseling or therapy, versus like strengths is icing on the cake in the human experience, right? And so, but if the foundation's not there, if they don't trust, if they don't have, if no one has shown them compassion, if they've worked in high instability, right? If we've blown their trust, doesn't matter what we like to say, we're now with strengths, we're putting lipstick on a pig, right? And that's probably a bad thing, because I'm not calling them a pig.
No.
But,
and I get where you're going, and the separation of the behavior from the strengths. But this guy's been in the organization 17 years. There's long tenure, and it's an organization which has half the people who have very long tenure and half the people who've been brought in with commercial background. So there's that tension between context, history, and legacy, and what we can do in the future. And he's been elevated and promoted.
Yeah, which we see it happen, right? And then you can't, in this kind of situation, this person needs a really good manager, right? Whether it's working on them. Is that you? Is that you?
So I'm the coach. I'm the independent coming in, facilitating a whole review of culture, blah, blah, blah. And the manager, he's a nice, lovely guy. Communication is really low. There's softer skills. He's a deep analyst. And there's, you're right. I think that's kind of the pinnacle.
There could be a fundamental structural problem in the way the manager has been assigned to the team, or the way the team's interacting, or some of those kinds of things. I mean, I think we probably
the CEO.
Oh, well, okay. We see this a lot. I see this a lot where the CEO is not the company's best manager.
Correct.
In a lot of cases, they're good at something in particular. Oftentimes they're a subject matter expert that catapulted them to the CEO position. Nor should they, or if they're not the company's best manager, they need to have a staff member who is, right? Someone's got to manage this guy.
Yeah.
And if it's the CEO's not doing it, which it sounds like maybe it's not happening, right? Then something needs to kick in to do it. So I think sometimes when we see this opposition, we need to take a step back to kind of keep this strengths related. We need to take a step back and say, is there a fundamental management issue here with this person? Or have they been promoted into a role where they really exceed their ability to do what they need to do, right? Or do we just have do we need to change some structural stuff first so this person will be open to it? Listen, not everybody's going to be open to it either, right? I mean, sometimes we just have difficult situations, and it either needs to be handled or moved on.
Yeah.
And so, I'd love to say we could throw strengths at it, but that's not the tool for it.
No, and look, I think you're right. Thanks for that, because it's when I look at him, I believe his strengths are there. It's that behavior, it's the other stuff that's there. It's the structural issues, not the strengths issues that are probably driving this.
Yeah, and an ability to embrace and let those strengths do something for them. There's something more behind it, and I dig in a little bit more to see if you can find that. So Great.
Thank you.
Great question. Thanks, man. Great question. Sandy. Sorry. Thanks, Sandy. Mick, you're muted. Sorry. The number one said phrase in America on Zoom. Hey, you're muted.
Yeah. We call it a Pete Turner in our organization because Pete does it all the time. Nick Hurst, and you've sent some pieces to Nick, but I think it'd be worthwhile just having a quick touch on this. Hi all, we touched on onboarding earlier. Keen to understand techniques and strategy to introduce a new culture to individuals with varied individual strengths. And Nick has recently taken on principalship in an organization and moved up. It's a team where he's looking to create a culture around that. Any insights around that, Jim? Anything you would say? I know that you've shared a case study on boarding.
Yeah, one of our very, sorry, Mick, sorry to cut you off there. One of our very best, Danny Lee, last year, might have even been late 2020. We came on and we talked about this subject of onboarding. And so I dropped the link in the chat if you want to go, if you got some time, I think, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes, something like that. Some clues. For this, the purpose of this call, the concept of onboarding is very personalized by organization. And so I think an assessment needs to be made. How are we onboarding? Like, you have to inspect what you expect, right? So if your onboarding does not have expectations associated with it, it's not onboarding. You got to say, hey, at the end of this session or the end of this time, whatever that happens to be, the person onboarding should have these, whatever it's competencies or have gone through these experiences, should be able to check some things off. Now, how organizations do that just kind of depends on the organization and the structure, how they're set up, where their employees are located. That's not a one size fits all. I think each organization needs to struggle with and build their own onboarding program to make it work. I'll give you an example, though, something I did with my interns. So I've hired hundreds of interns for Gallup over the years and ran the internship program there. They were with us for 12 weeks, and we happen to have this Q12 tool that has 12 questions. That fits a nice little 12 weeks, 12 questions. I mean, I'm not very smart, but that worked out pretty well, right? And so each week, we ended the week with one of the questions. Doesn't mean I gave them the assessment. It just means we asked the question, right? Do I know what's expected of me is the first question. That's a pretty great question. Like, if an employee gets to the end of their first week and they don't know what's expected of them, you failed, right? As an organization, you have absolutely failed. But we know when we ask that question in organizations, people who have been there years are struggling to know what's expected of them, right? So if they haven't got it in their first week, how great would it be if you can knock that out in the very first week? And as a manager, as their manager, I'd sit them down individually. This is my choice. Again, you don't have to do it this way, but I'd sit them down individually and say, okay, you tell me what you think's expected of you. And it was pretty telling whether we nailed it or not in that conversation, right? The second week is, do I have the materials and equipment to do my job? Well, again, if we get to the end of the second week and they don't have the right materials, you know how many employees are working currently that don't have all the materials they need to actually, we hired them, but we didn't give them the tools they need to do their job, right? So for me, that's the way I like to do onboarding, was to run them through 12 weeks of Q12. And along with other things, right? We had other things that we would do. We had some strengths discovery sessions and some of those kinds of things going on. You build it or design it however you see fit based on your organizational culture. But if you don't have an intentional onboarding program, Mick, that has some definite results at the end, I think that it'd be a great place to start.
I think it has some definite results at the beginning, the middle, and the end, mate. I think it has.
Again, the best time to do that was 10 years ago, but the second best time is right now. Get started right now.
That's useful. Thank you, Jim.
And Nick, just two things, Nick, which are really great. Everyone in their organization, Jim, has done strengths. And I know as part of the journey that we're on, we're about to do the Q12 engagement survey as well, to get a baseline as well. So two of the things you've spoken about, Nick's organisation is very much involved in, and Nick, it sets us up for a very good next up session together, mate.
Absolutely. I have listened to some of this wincing that we're very good at telling people how to save their documents with the right file name, and we perhaps need to move on to the culture a little bit more consciously. And I'm conscious I've got colleagues on the call as well. So yeah, it's said knowing that they're listening.
Yeah. Well done.
Well said, Nick. Well said.
I see that Scotty Teal had his hand raised. So keeping in mind that Scott is in quarantine in Hong Kong, and I called him last night and just told him how grateful I was not in that room. And everyone who knows Scotty well will know that comes with the greatest of love and affection. But is Scott still on the call? Because he had his hand raised. Scotty?
I am here. Hey, Mick.
Mate, how is day number 4 going? Is that right?
I lost count. I actually got into the rhythm of it today. I ran 24K on the treadmill. I've done some great work calls, and then I remembered this call tonight. So I thought, it's all good. And got delivered. So I'm on a winner.
Scott, if it makes you feel any better, I'm in quarantine as well. So we were exposed this weekend, and I got that call on Monday.
Human interaction's overrated. It's just
So Scotty is a lunatic, mate. He is our reigning person of the year in our 2BYB community. Last year, just to give you an insight into who this person is, he did a 1,000,000 steps challenge in January, where he did 1 million steps in the month of January. So for everyone who's trying to figure that out, it's an average of 22 kilometers per day, every day for the month. So he does have the capacity to be a lunatic. So Scotty, what's your, and one of the brightest and best that I've ever worked with. It's a real pleasure to have you on the school calls, Scotty. What's the question, mate?
Thanks, Mick, for the intro, and Jim, I really enjoyed your chat so far. I particularly love the, get to a place where your 11 is honoured. That resonated, and it probably drives the question. I'm in the midst of a transition. I've just left a large corporate where I think my 11 was not honoured. It's fair to say. My 11 might have been a little bit too Spinal Tap for them in some ways, but I'm now sort of in the process of building a new business, and a question really relates to, we have the strengths, and we do that on a very personal basis, and Mick's also come out and done work with some of my teams on a team basis, and that's been good as well. But it got me thinking about the equivalent of the corporate strength, and we talk about, corporates tend to talk about building or establishing values or a culture or a vision or a mission statement. And often they are pinned to the wall and bear little resemblance to what's actually going on in the ground. I just wondered, is there an equivalent of, a corporate sort of strengths-based approach? Because like others have shared, it's been working with Mick and working on the Strengths Finder has been a real, life changer for me in so many ways. And as I'm building, this new business and thinking about the culture, I just wonder if is there a corporate equivalent to sort of finding your strengths? I mean, the way to, who I am, what we are as a business, and how we maximize, how do we find the corporate 11, I think is the question.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I think from a consulting standpoint, when we go into organizations and work with them on their strengths, and hopefully we're doing engagement with them as well, thinking about their corporate well-being, I think we begin to help them see those. But no, I couldn't say, oh yeah, we've got a values builder. That's kind of, I think, what you're asking, right? What's the company values that we're driving towards? We don't have, I don't think, a systematic process that's available to do that. I think we do that a lot for organizations, and I think it's some of the work that we did, that we've done with Stryker and Southwest and Accenture. we've helped the corporate teams see those things. But man, that's a great idea, is to have a values builder. I kind of
All right, let's do it.
like that.
Let's connect offline. Let's build it.
Yeah.
And be careful what you wish for, when getting involved with Scotty. The million steps is just the tip of the iceberg.
Mick, I understand. I didn't, in my 40s, I didn't run one marathon. I ran 5 because I couldn't stop. You got started and you can't stop. I climb Mount Evans, which is a 14,000 foot ascent during a race, and I've done a vertical mile. I totally understand Scott. I totally understand. My maximizer, it says whatever's worth doing is worth overdoing. So I completely understand where you come from.
I still think you don't, but I'll take you.
All right.
I'll take you at your word, Jim. I think we've got time for one more question, which is TP Tim Popperwell, before we close off for today. So Tim, over to you, mate.
Yeah, mine's a little bit more great session, by the way. Really enjoyed it. Mine's a little bit more back into the weeds a little bit. I'm just wondering, when you look at the domains, I've got a really senior guy who works with me who has 8 of his top 9 strengths are execution. And I'm just wondering, when you get a person whose strengths are really, really skewed into one of the domains, how do you go about that? Is there any tips you can give us?
Yeah. By the way, the domains, it's a little magical how there's 4 and then all 34 kind of fit into 4. We say they're more like membranes, less like walls. Things can pass in between. So I wouldn't get too definitive about the domain, so to speak. They also don't have the research that we did for strengths as far as the names going to the strengths. So I would just tell people, be very, very careful on that. Now, that being said, we spent a whole bunch of time looking at them, and they hold to those. So in this case, most in executing. So you have a fabulous executor in this sense, right? I'd begin to ask the questions of, okay, back to our life on 11. How have they had success in the past in this area of execution? And then how do we line those up, or do they line up in the current role that they're in? And how can they be exploited? And I use that word on purpose. How can they be exploited in their own profession to make sure we're getting the max value out of them? Again, so oftentimes we see that and we immediately go, oh no, you're unbalanced, which is a negative statement, where I'd rather say, oh man, you're incredibly talented in the area of execution. Like, how do we take advantage of that? Not saying there aren't things we need to be careful with, but just that the difference of approaching that from a positive perspective instead of a negative one to start with. And so I think I'd start going through, I'd do a success, like, tell me how you've been successful in executing, and let's see if there's some common things that start to show up in this. And then how do we point those towards what you're currently doing? Then the very last thing is, and then how do we protect you from yourself when you're at 11? If the organization's not going to honor that. And Scott, maybe that goes back to your question. If you're on 11 and the organization's struggling with you, okay, we've got some negotiations to do to kind of figure that out. I don't know. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yeah, it does. It is that. It's a little bit Scotty's question as well around how do you protect them from themselves, but also how do you kind of insulate or protect them from others, particularly with the execution strengths so prominent, because he's absolutely fabulous, as you can imagine. But what happens is he's kind of on 11 in terms of that all the time, which means that others kind of drop down jump out of the way a little bit and just let him do his thing.
Sure. Well, so awareness, this is where team awareness is super important. The team knowing these and the self-awareness of him to be able to say, yeah, I am this way. That knowledge can oftentimes mitigate that risk. and it has to be reminded from time to time. That's why these reminders, these team sessions where we remind each other, oh yeah, this is, I am this way. And the rest of the team nodding their heads and going, yep, yes, you are. That changes the equation in the team setting, because now we all understand. We've got the ground rules at this point. We all understand that. Doesn't make it perfect. Doesn't mean I still don't have to apologize from time to time for rolling over people, right? But knowing that I do that, and the team knowing that I do that, gives me better odds. You know, it's like having house odds in Vegas. If you had house odds in Vegas, you'd bet everything all the time, right? Because you have the house odds. I think having these conversations and having Clifton Strengths gives you house odds. Doesn't mean you win every time, but you'll win more often than you lose.
And fantastic. And this has been such a win for us today. Of course, Tim is a Gallup strengths coach as well, so he has that capacity to bring that into his organization as well.
Yeah.
Great guy, that key part of our 2BYB community as well. So great to have him on the call. Well, Jim, we've got to the end of the allotted time, and I know that you've got to go and do a call to coach in Spanish today. You did Portuguese yesterday, Spanish today. You're working
Spanish
your way around the world. There's a few people I'd like to thank. Obviously, first and foremost, Jim, the world's premier strengths consultant. I think we all took a lot of that value today as he gets a chance to bask in that glory. I'd also love to thank Olivia. Liv is our head of relationships and experience at 2B Limitless, and the organization is just so much better since she joined in terms of the role that she does for us. And importantly, as much as Jim and I would have got out of talking to ourselves, thank you to you for finding the time to come today. I'd like to also now give everyone the opportunity just to turn their cameras on so that Olivia can take a photo of us all looking fantastic together. Of course, if you're uncomfortable, no, Nick, no more hair there, mate. That's as much as you've got. Yeah. We'd love to get a photo of you. We'll be posting this. Of course, 2B Limitless through COVID delivered a Friday, what was then a Thursday session, which of course with the new weekend in the Middle East became a Friday session. Every Friday now, we do it monthly. We're looking forward to you joining us next month. Jim, thank you today for joining us. Absolutely exceptional, mate, and really enjoyed the interaction around strengths, and just encourage everyone on the call to go and bring the very best of themselves to the weekend. No better time to do it. And then, of course, the very best version of you to your life as well. So we'll be recording.
Hey, so everyone's got a smile.
Everyone's got a smile.
Got it. Thank you.
Feels fantastic. Thank you to all of you for joining us today, and we really appreciate it. Community is massive for us at 2B Limitless, and we feel really fortunate that you are part of that community. Thank you. Thanks a million for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you. Great to see you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.